I think we are now slowly transitioning to the first panel of the day, which is indeed covered by very many esteemed personalities in the open science infrastructure, of course, in academia. And I look forward to that panel very, very much. It will concentrate on, of course, open, as I said, academia and open science infrastructure. And to moderate the panel, we have invited Dr. Juan Pablo Alperin, who is an assistant professor at the School of Publishing at Simon Fraser University. Dr. Alperin serves also as the Associate Director of Research for the Public Knowledge Project and the co-director of the Scholarly Communications Lab. He is a multidisciplinary scholar who uses a combination of computational techniques and traditional qualitative methods to investigate how knowledge is produced, disseminated, and used. Dr. Alperin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thanos, and thank you to all of the conference organizers for the invitation to participate again this year, as well as for all the thoughtfulness that has gone into the conference program and to the logistics, as I think it has already been noted, but I just wanted to, again, express my gratitude there. What is remarkable about this event, unlike many of the discussions of scholarly communications and open science that I've been a part of now for many years, it's a truly global representation of the perspectives and issues that we've heard over the past 2 days. This is unsurprising, given our hosts that we're having this international and really truly global dimension, but it's nonetheless worth noting the significance of approaching the drive from open science from a lens that is really inclusive of the realities and experiences and the needs from every corner of the world. Although there's been some efforts in some so-called sort of global open science events to include the perspectives from these other parts of the world, sometimes it's done with a sense of awe and fascination, the curious activities that happen from the global south. It's rare to find forums such as this one that engage with the full gamut of experiences. I'm going to keep my introductions brief, as I realize much of what I would have wanted to say has already been emphasized many times over the last 2 days. And I do want to make sure we give maximum time to our panelists and to the questions from the audience. However, what can't be stated enough, and what's made amply clear, I think, throughout this pandemic, is the incredibly interconnected nature of the systems behind research creation and of the platforms in which this research circulates. It was these interconnected and transnational systems that allowed us to tap into our collective global capacity. This much, I think, has been made clear and stated quite a few times throughout the last 2 days. However, what perhaps wasn't emphasized as much, at least not with as much vigor, is that the opportunity to benefit from these achievements of the global effort have been grossly unequal. We need not look no further than what has been touted as the clearest demonstration of our collective ability, the rapid development of the COVID-19 vaccines, and the ways in which the limited doses have been distributed. While countries like the US and Canada, where I make my home, are discussing third booster shots, millions of others in countries around the world are eagerly waiting for any doses to become available. We have been far too quick, I think, sometimes to pat ourselves on the back and tell what can be gained from adopting open sciences, but we must also open our eyes to how the underlying systems and the infrastructure that enabled this progress encourages models and practices that benefit a few, far too often at the expense of the many. Today's presentations will help us foreground the systems and the infrastructure that underpin science and research communication. They will help us understand how the adoption of one solution in one part of the world, perhaps the choice of a technological platform, a set of incentives, or an access model, can either bolster or limit opportunities elsewhere. Sometimes these types of choices remain invisible or are given low priority when we get caught up in pushing for the opening of research outputs and see any opening of science as positive. I hope these next presentations will encourage everyone in the audience to consider that our systems of research are indeed interconnected, but that this means that they're interconnected for better or worse. The choices that are made in one part of the world are consequential in how we distribute the benefits of open science. Today, we're going to hear from 5 presenters across 4 presentations. I'll introduce them all at once now in the order in which they'll speak, and then I'll turn it over to them for their presentations. As has been the case throughout the conference, we will then have an opportunity for questions from the audience. So I ask that you please type your questions into the Q&A area of your stream at any time, and the wonderful team here behind the scenes will help pass the questions along to me so that I can ask them to our panelists. I do ask that you indicate if your question is directed at an individual panelist or if it's a general question for all of them. That will make it a little bit easier for me to navigate that communication. We're going to begin today with a presentation of Dr. Frank Miedema, who is a professor of open science and vice rector of research and chair of open science at Utrecht University. Dr. Miedema has a long and renowned history of promoting open science ideals. And I'll encourage you to look for his upcoming book titled Open Science, The Very Idea, in which he describes recent developments in science from a historical, sociological, and philosophical perspective. He's going to be followed by two speakers from CLACSO, the Latin American Council of Social Sciences. One will be Dr. Dominique Bavini, who is an open science advisor and previously repository manager at CLACSO, as well as a member of UNESCO's Open Science Partnership and of the International Science Council Steering Group on the future of scientific publishing. She will be accompanied in the second presentation by her colleague, Dr. Laura Rovelli, who is a researcher and professor at the National University of La Plata, as well as the coordinator of CLACSO's Latin American Forum for Research Assessment, FOLEC, which Dr. Behel mentioned yesterday, as well as the CLACSO IDRC project on research assessment for the allocation of research funds in the Global South. Our third presentation, you will hear from Mr. Omo Oaya, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of the West and Central African Research and Education Network, WACREN. Prior to this, he was a pioneer CTO of WACREN and the CEO of a private sector consultancy offering software development and project management support to research and academic institutions in Nigeria and other parts of Africa. And finally, but certainly not least, you'll have the distinct pleasure of hearing from another fellow Latin American, Dr. Bianca Amaro. Dr. Amaro is the coordinator of the Brazilian Open Sciences Program at the Brazilian Institute of Information on Science and Technology, and the current president of La Referencia, which you just heard Dr. Gadon reference earlier. She is a coordinator of too many projects and initiatives for me to name, but it's probably sufficient for me to say that I consider her to be Latin America's preeminent champion of open access repositories. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Dr. Miedema.
Thank you very much. Let me first thank the organizers for inviting me to this wonderful and very stimulating conference. I always thought that I was a radical, but after hearing Jean-Claude Guidon, I think I have to be very modest about my, say, radicalities, and I think he beat me in all aspects. So I really enjoyed the talk. My talk today will be, focusing on the system. So where is everybody in the system and how can we improve science for the better, for the world, and where should we have our interventions in the system? So my talk will be very much about the system, and also very much about power. So that relates to also the previous talk. Can I have the next slide, please? So I have to plead guilty as well. So I should have done it better in the previous slide. I have been a dean in a large medical center in a large university in Utrecht in Holland. And I have been very, very deeply ingrained in the system. I was trained producing Nature and Science papers, and I made my career. So if somebody is guilty in this audience, it's me. But I confess that I was converted, and I saw that we had to change, and it was totally going out of hand. So for the past 20 years, I've been working on these aspects. So I'm not going to dwell too long with you about this, where the problems of science are. I think we heard a lot already in the previous days, which were extremely interesting and very much to the point. We know the quality and replication crisis. We know it's about competition and not about cooperation. It's about commercial publishing. We heard a lot about it in the previous hour. And it's also about a relationship with society. My talk will be focusing on the relation with society. I think that is, for me, the reason to do open science. Can I have the next slide, please? So what is also very important in my talk is, and this goes also well with the previous speakers, it's all about metrics. And so what we always say with Paul Wouters and Bianca Kramer and Jung Bosman, and they have been mentioned already by the previous speaker, metrics shape science. So how, if the way you incentivize and reward researchers, that is what they are going to do, because they have to survive in the system. They want to make a career. They have to go for the next grant. So metrics shape science. And if somebody thinks that, highly educated people don't do it, we are all human. So everybody who wants to survive is going for the metrics. And of course, this goes against novelty and quantity, because it's all about quality and replication and relevance and impact is not, say very highly regarded. So you have to be novel all of the time, and it should be about a lot. And the other thing which is very important to realize that in a system where everything is 4-year or 5-year funding, people are avoiding, say, very complicated problems and questions. So they go for short-termism, and they are risk averse. And that is, of course, very, there's a lot of sociology about that to show that. And the other thing which is very important for me also is that given the type of metrics you use, some fields that have extremely high societal impact but are low in the metrics, they will suffer. Of course, also across academy and in the academic system, of course, it's applied is lower in esteem than basic science, but also social science and humanities are lower in esteem than the STEM. I was raised in chemistry, in biochemistry, immunity. So I came from the hard sciences. But those soft sciences, is that really? Are they really scientists as well? They don't do the things that we do, and they don't publish in the high journal, interfactor journal. So, and this is of course ironically speaking, but this is what you hear nearly every day when you're in academia. And the last thing again is metrics shape science. So if the metrics are steering our, say, our behavior and our choices to study and to pick our problems. We pick the problems because we can make the nice papers in the nice journals. Then this goes against societal and clinical needs and disease burden. There's a lot of evidence in the literature to show that, and that the metrics are going against a lot of research which should be done, but is not paying off for the researcher and is not helping to for academic career advancement. So in that respect, metrics shape science is something that you should really keep in mind all of the time. Next slide, please. So having said this, I started to show this slide, which was I borrowed from Laurens Hessels. He had it in his thesis, but he borrowed it from Latour and Woolgar, and they borrowed it from Pierre Bourdieu. And you can see here, this is the cycle. And if you start at the top, I cannot use my pointer, but if you can start at the top, then you saw, then I was hired by somebody who had published very nice articles when he was on a postdoc stage in the United States. He came back to Holland. He got recognition and he got money. So we go against the clock. He hired me and other staff, and he bought equipment, and he was put in the laboratory. And we were, as PhDs, producing data. And those data were converted into articles. We passed the peer review. And so I was first author, my boss was last author, and this was for many PhDs in his lab. And so I got my recognition, I got my money, I hired my staff and equipment. They produced the data. I was last author, they were first author. And yeah, this is how science works. And this is not only in STEM, not only in the biomedical or in the natural science, but this also has happened in social sciences, psychology, and what have you. So this is what people are now doing. And of course, if you look at this, then you can say, well, this is just, it's a system. But look at the top. This is, of course, also about professional interests. It's about elites. It's about stratification, and it's about power struggle. Stratification means what has been shown before by the previous speaker. The type of journals you publish is determining your say, reputation and your esteem. And of course, so then you belong to the elites, and then you can decide who gets the next grants and who will publish the next articles, etc., etc. And so this is the system as it is. This is what Pierre Bourdieu was calling a field or a champ. And indeed, this is exactly how science works. Of course, this is not what people had in mind when they started a career in science. So if I show this picture and I explain it, and I say, I have been going through this circle many times, the credit circle, and then people say, I don't like it, because this is not the idea of a vocational scientific career working for the human good. This is just a career advancement system. And yes, I have to admit to you, this is how it has developed. And even worse, next slide. Because in this system, and I start with you at the top right, so at say 2 o'clock, then it's all about, and you heard it by the previous speakers, it's all about age indexes, journal impact factors, the number of articles. It's very much quantitative and very little qualitative. Of course, there are spots around the country or also in your country where people do differently, but this is dominantly what people have been using. And this is also where the rankings are, university rankings, what Professor Gordon has been explaining to us. So this is driving very much the type of articles we're producing, and the type of articles is also the type of research we are performing, the choice, the problem choice. And then, of course, at 4 o'clock, most papers behind paywalls, we don't share data. I made my career in HIV/AIDS research, and we never shared data in the early 80s and 90s because we needed the data and the samples for our career. We needed the next papers, and so sharing your data, that was really stupid, because then you were giving your data to in fact competition. And then, of course, at the other thing at 11 o'clock, then this is all about hyper competition. This is all about individual, say, scoring individual reputation and individual credit points. And of course, there are limited funds. All of the time, there are more researchers than funds. So people are fighting, and they are playing this game, getting those articles, getting those H indexes, and of course also getting the funding, which is also important. So at say 8 o'clock, you can see too little room for team science. The previous speaker was pointing to that. Yeah, team science, that is very dangerous, because then you're diluting your credit with other people. So I was raised on doing your research with, say, 1 or 2 colleagues at most, and try to score. So think about multidisciplinarity and diversity in this system. Totally irrelevant. This is dominantly still what we see around the world. In the Chinese, and also in Hong Kong, Singapore, I've been everywhere. Everybody has been, say, taking this type of, say, this social game over. And the worst thing is at the top. And this is at 12 o'clock. There you see society is largely absent from the credibility cycle. So it's really, in most cases, so that even in biomedicine, patients, the family of patients, and people involved in disease management, they are very, very, rarely involved in making choices, evaluating science, etc. They are outside. They can have a say, but they are not, say, allowed to be in the peer review, and also not in the audit committees. And this is, of course, extremely, say, important, because a lot of research which is being done is totally irrelevant for the problem, and that those researchers think they are addressing. So in many cases, there is a mismatch between the research being done and the real societal need and real societal and clinical problems that should be solved. And this is, of course, also has been noted. And this is very much, of course, the consequences of the choices people make based on the incentive and reward system. And this is in this slide, you see all the flaws in the credit cycle. Of course, in the credit cycle, for instance, articles, they are published by the publishers, and the money is coming from funders, and the institutional, say, evaluations are being done on articles. So I was the dean, I was counting articles, and I didn't read them, etc., etc. So every actor that has been mentioned in the previous talks is in this credit cycle somewhere, and they all say are interdependent. So the journals, they use us, they use our articles to make money, but they also help us to, they say, evaluate research. Of course, we have been discussing that, and that's totally flawed. So the journal impact factor should never be used for that, but still, this is how the system is intertwined, and we are all dependent on each other. So breaking this chain, breaking this credit cycle, and getting to another system is what we have been doing in Europe, in the United States. It's also happening in the United States with DORA. It happens everywhere, but this is extremely difficult because everything is dependent on the other agent. So funders and institutional managers like deans or say vice chancellors like me, they are all in the system, and everything depends on each other. So therefore, it's extremely difficult to change this system. So it's easy to say we're going to publish open access, but as soon as open access means lower impact factors, it stops. And we all know this, and so this is the interdependency. Next slide, please. So the overall aim of open science is to do something in this circle, to really change the credit cycle. And this is what I've been doing for the past 10 years, say roughly. And it's about quality, progress, and scientific and societal impact. So it's really a comprehensive approach, because if you don't have the comprehensive approach, things will not change. If you don't change the incentive and reward system, people are not going to publish open access. They are not going to change to exchange and share data, because it's against their individual interest. And of course, everybody wants to belong to the elites that publish in Nature and Science. I have been chasing that myself, so I know exactly how that feels. So now, next slide, please. So to achieve these goals, then we have to, for me, it's very important to engage with appropriate and with relevant and representative stakeholders from society. I came from the HIV/AIDS research in the 80s and the 90s, and there it was common to discuss with the people, the men who had sex with men, and also drug users, IV drug users, to go and to discuss with them what type of research shall we do, etc., etc. But we had to learn it. It was difficult for us. We came from the lab, and we had to go outside the lab to talk to the people who really were, say, in the context where the disease was. So define your problems that are to be investigated. Don't do it yourself, but discuss ongoing research, define problems together with the relevant stakeholders that you are aiming at, and have them and listen to what they have to say to you. Be reflexive, and of course actively promote also the results of any kind and that should be, say, also give guidance to implementation and actions in the context. So it's a paper in Nature is not going to cure a patient. It has to be, say, applied. It has to be put in the context and tested in the context. And this is, of course, very much also what Professor Goujon was saying. I think he was referring to Charles Sanders Peirce and pragmatism, which I'm also very in favor. So this is what for me is the heart of open science. It is engaging with society. And therefore, next slide. You need to share your results. You have to, and also in all possible stages, not only at the end, but also midterm, discuss with your clients, with your stakeholders, with patients, with people who are interested and who are stakeholders in your research, who are in the context, discuss with them. And also, if possible, make it fair and make it open. It can be a problem, so it's not necessarily open, but open if possible and closed if necessary. And the last but not least, I cannot say it many times enough, if the incentive reward system is not changing, as I described just all these problems to you, nothing is gonna work. So it took a long time before in the open science movement, incentive and rewards was brought on board. And I have to say, I credit the European Union, they did it in 2016. And that was the first time very, very, say, explicitly incentive and rewards was brought into the context of open science. In my book, I have devoted several chapters to that. Next slide, please. So if you go to the ideal world of open science, so this is the promise of open science in this slide. We have done systemic interventions to improve quality, impact, and integrity. So it also means we start at the top with engagement of societal stakeholders in problem choice, research, and evaluation. So this used to be called Mode 2 research by Helga Nowotny and her colleagues 20 years ago already. Never made it because mainstream, we were just doing journal imperfectos. And then, of course, we go to inclusive. I'm now at 2 o'clock. Inclusive indicators, quality. We follow DORA. We go for societal impact. We go for academic leadership. It's not only what you produce, but also how do you produce it. Equality, diversity, inclusiveness, academic culture, safety, openness, also in your institutes, in your labs, etc., etc. So it's very, very important. If you have this engagement with, say, stakeholders outside, the pick of your questions, the choice of your questions will be much better, and you have much more chance to have a huge impact. And of course, open peer review, post peer review, we can discuss. And of course, everything that has been said before by Professor Goujon, open access publishing. And of course, I am also, I have to admit, an ambassador for Plan S, but we have been saying from the beginning, we have to go beyond APCs. APCs is the only transition. We have to go beyond APCs to platforms, and I cannot agree with you more. And we have Paul Wouters on board, people who know exactly, and also Bianca Kramer and Jeroen Bosman, they are also in Utrecht. So we are pushing very, very hard. And I am also pushing in Plan S, because we knew it was against, say, it was sort of new colonialism. It was against, say, the global south, and people realize now that we have to go beyond APCs. Next slide, please. To finish off, this is what we do in Utrecht. We do it but we're not alone. And you can find me on Twitter, and we are now in Science Business. We are very, very, say, outgoing about, say, presenting this to the world. And I don't have any pretensions. We didn't invent it. It was there. And we did it together with Europe, with many people around the world, with DORA, with many people around the world. and there's many people now engaging in this type of activities in the institutions, because having been a dean, I think funders are important, but to be very honest, academic leadership in the universities, in the Federation of Universities in Europe is extremely important, because in the end, if I as a dean say we're not going to use journal impact factors anymore, and I will work to it that also across the globe people will look and read your papers and not look where the venue of publication was, that is going to change. So I'm very much in favor of the academic leadership should really take this as a responsibility to have a better science for the future, and also for the people who are now in training and who will be the next generations. So I will leave you here. There's a lot to be found on the internet. If you Google me, I've been doing this passionately for a long time. And of course, I felt a little bit guilty because I made my career, I have my papers, and I was playing the game. I have been discussing that many times around the world, also in Singapore and Hong Kong. But now it's time to really change, and we are working on it for 10 years. And I know also that many of you have been in this fight, but it's a tough game, because look again, it's against certification. There's an elite who has other interests, not only the commercial publishers, but also in academia. It's also about money and reputation and power. So, and I stop here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
I think touching on, reconnecting, I think, what was Jean-Claude Guédon's presentation now to the topics of this panel very nicely, and helping us to think really about the systems, the incentives that are at play, the individual careers, and also, I think, touching upon the conversation with the role that Plan S is playing and helping us to think about the interconnected nature, I think, that I was alluding to in my introductory remarks. Let me turn it now over to both Dominique Bavini and Lara Rovelli, who will present now from Claxo's perspective.
Thank you, Juan Pablo Alperin, for your introduction, and thank you to the UN for this invitation for Claxo to participate. Inspiring and challenging keynote speakers. Thank you, Jean-Claude, for your message to funders and to libraries and research managers. Thank you, Professor Miedema. So many presentations which are inspiring. It's a learning experience. In these times, the pandemic, the climate change, and any of the sustainable development goals require as much local as global research outputs and data. Please, next slide. In our region, Latin America, an important part of research outputs is published within the region in Spanish and Portuguese to address local and regional audiences and needs. A region where public funding and universities have a leading role in the development and leadership of open access venues. It is a region with the highest adoption of open access in its journals, with no charging to read and no charge to publish. Regional indexing of journals is taken care by community-led and publicly funded initiatives as Latindex, Redalic, Amelica, Cielo, which contribute to give visibility and improve the quality of open access journals. And the institutional repositories and subject repositories, which are institutional repositories, are the preferred venue for the open access national policies being approved in the regions. And those repositories are members of La Referencia and guided by CORE, and La Referencia is present in this panel, fortunately. Who uses these open access research outputs? Well, because of Juan Pablo Alperin research, we know that 25% of users, please the next slide, 25% of users are researchers and professors, 50% are students, 18% of use is for professional practice and 7% for personal use, thus reaching wider audiences as required by UNESCO recommendations on open science. Next slide, please. Diverse societal actors are providers of data in this pandemic. We see COVID-19 patients using their smartphones to report their symptoms to doctors and authorities twice a day. We see health institutions and research institutions and diversity of societal actors provide daily data for local and international mapping and analysis of the pandemic and its devastating socioeconomic impact, and to inform policy. And what about communicating worldwide COVID-19 research results? Please, next. Looking at the limitations of the so-called mainstream scholarly communications with poor presence of research outputs from less privileged institutions and countries, we have seen in this pandemic growing voices of concerns about the need to direct more funding to support non-profit, community-based open infrastructures that provide a more equitable open access system. Next, please. So that open science can advance as during this pandemic with no paywalls to read, but we also need with no paywalls to publish in open access. APCs at the market value are unaffordable for us in developing regions. Next, please. We need the community to take the main decisions about the future of open access. I quote Geoffrey Bolton's message yesterday. It is time for science to take control back. Next, please. The Budapest Open Access Initiatives, as part of their 20th anniversary, will launch a community consultation to gather perspectives on the future of open access. It will be published in their website. Which are our concerns in Latin America? We are concerned that community-owned infrastructure will be underfunded because scarce funds will be available only to be directed to pay APCs. Why? Because researchers are rewarded mainly when publishing in mainstream journals, as it has been mentioned here in these presentations. Mainstream journals with prestige industry indicators making invisible other contributions. This is why Claxo, together with other initiatives in the world, promotes a review in the research assessment principles and procedures. And this activity in Claxo is coordinated by Laura Rovelli, who will continue with this presentation. Laura, please.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Thank you very much, moderator Juan Pablo Arperin, and to the organizers and the team from the Open Science Conference at United Nations. First of all, what is the FOLEC? The Latin American Forum for Research Assessment is an initiative from Claxo, the Latin American Council of Social Science, that is a space, a regional space for debate and exchange on the meanings, policies, and practices of research assessment in the region. FOLEC follows the principles of DORA Declaration and Leiden and the Declaration of Panama. And from a broad and plural viewpoint, it seeks to share experiences and find agreements to build and promote research assessment transformation and commit the academic and scientific systems with these changes. Actions that have been taken are diagnosis proposals on research assessment in our region and a series of advocacy papers on research assessment and consultations with regional and international specialists. At present, FOLEC has more than 35 other organizations and institutions of science, technology, and higher education that are supporting this initiative. Why FOLEC was created? Well, it was created because of this split that Dominic Babini was mentioning before between this long-standing tradition of open access managed by the academy and knowledge as a public good this split, I was saying, between this tradition and the criteria and indicators used by national evaluation systems that are not in symphony with this cultural and tradition of knowledge in our region. Please, next. So one of the lessons learned about research assessment from our space is agreeing what was mentioning before. Research assessment of scholarly publishing based on traditional indicators, for example, impact factor of journals, does not contribute to incentivize inclusive and participatory open science practices using bibliodiverse and multilingual local as well as international open access venues for publishing. As in that sense, we support and we celebrate the decision of the European Research Council, for example, in its recent measures taken in its last work program, where applicants for the first time are told to avoid mentioning the impact factor. Or, for example, the Utrecht University decision that they will stop taking into consideration the impact factor to measure the quality of its researchers. And as Jean-Claude Guédon was mentioning before, of course, we agree with the second plan on open science from France that is also aligning with this view on research assessment. Please, next. So which are the main goals of research assessment? Well, basically from Folek and Claxo, we think that they are related with high quality research, diverse, equitable, and relevant. And also open sciences for social transformation, for sustainable development and innovation. And that research assessment should stimulate equitable collaboration and participation and reshape and expand the notion of excellence based on responsible and situated methodologies. Please, next. So the future of research assessment, we agree with all of you, should be and must be open access and open science, interoperable regional and local databases, both qualitative and quantitative evaluation, as we mentioned before, equity, diversity, inclusion, multilingualism, bibliodiversity, among other principles. Please, next. I would like to focus on other lessons that we learned from the COVID-19 pandemic and of interest for climate change emergencies that make emphasis on trends toward high-quality, mission-oriented research to improve policy efforts and global sustainability, its contribution to solving social and environmental issues, and increase public engagement. On the road of an increasing demand for new indicators to capture the contribution of research to society, particularly those aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, there is a need to compare various methodologies, each of them with a particularly understanding of the Sustainable Development Goals, and evaluate their use for specific contexts and purposes in Latin America and the Caribbean. That is to say, mission-oriented research assessment might require referencing frameworks and situated methodologies, particularly or extended evaluation criteria and reviewers with wider backgrounds and expertise, practitioners or non-academic stakeholders, and the participation of social movements and or local communities. Taking into consideration what Dr. Miedena has said before, the idea is to restore society presence in the circle of credibility. Yes. Finally, The last lesson learned is that to exert its potential, open science needs to review its assessment procedures. Please next. And please next. So we from FOLEC and CLACSO invite you all to the 9th Latin American Conference of CLACSO in June 2022 that will take place in the National Autonomous University of Mexico. In that country, at the UNAM, one of the axes of the conference is Science, Technology and Society, Challenges of Knowledge and Evaluation, and we will be delighted to have you all there and discuss this topic from a regional and international point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominique and Laura, for reminding us again. I think something as you know, I have been talking about also for a long time about the way that the things are different in Latin America, and the adoption of some aspects of open science have been there for a long time. But also that the conversations around research assessment still continue to take place there, even in a place where the dynamics of open access and of open science are very different. And so we have similar conversations, although they take on a different dimension. We'll continue with our panel, and then we'll with Mr. Omo Oaya. I'll turn the floor over to you, Mr. Oaya.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Omo Oaya. I work for WACREN. WACREN is the Western Central African Research and Education Network. I'm going to be presenting a few slides on the work we are doing in Africa to establish a framework for sustainable open science. So I'm really glad to be here and sharing this. My presentation is going to be structured along these lines. First, I will talk about the emergence of NRENs, National Research Education Networks in Africa, and the work we have done in the Africa Connect project over the last 10 years. And then I would describe the LibSense initiative, which is a community initiative that is a collaboration between NRENs and libraries, and some of the work we are doing to foster open science culture on our campuses. Now, this approach is what we regard as the basic foundation for establishing a sustainable framework. There'll be other aspects that I would highlight as we go on. So NRENs in Africa. So really, this project, Africa Connect, has had 3 iterations. And although there were now a couple of NRENs before Africa Connect, the Africa Connect project, this project has been instrumental in driving the establishment of research networks and interconnecting them in Africa. So there have been 3 iterations. We're in the 3rd iteration. Started out in 2011, originally for East and South Africa only. And then the next 2 iterations were spanned the 3 regional RENs in the continent. So if you look on the right-hand side, the colors basically show you where we have NRENs and the different regional networks. So WACREN is in green, ASREN, which covers North Africa, is in yellow, and the UNOpenScience Alliance, the regional REN for South and East Africa, is in brown. As it is today, we currently running the 3rd iteration of the project. Some of the stats are there. It's a collaboration between African partners and the European Union. So we have 38 NRENs in Africa at the moment. 22 of them are connected. So that tells you, for those that know how many countries in Africa, we still have an odd 20 to actually establish NRENs and interconnect. So those are the countries in the different regions that are connected. The most connected region is the UNOpenScience Alliance with just about 15 NRENs. And in WACREN, we have 7 of them, and then ASREN, we have 4 of them. Now if you look on the right-hand side as well, you can see the growth of connections from the beginning in 2010, and where most of the connections were in sub-Saharan Africa was really only South Africa connected to Europe. And then in North Africa, because of the proximity to Europe across the Med, there were a few more countries there who were connected directly to London, to Europe in most cases, to London in most cases, but all to Europe. But by the end of the first iteration of the project, you can see the growth within Africa and internationally as well. And by 2021, that had become a little bit denser. So Africa Connect 3, we have 4 major outputs that we are looking at in Africa Connect 3. One is access to adequate infrastructures and make affordable infrastructures without the base connectivity and middleware like trust and identity layers that basically identified the institutions and their communities. Open science is not really possible. So also the second output is research and education services and applications. Some are advanced applications, some are more basic, but they also essential for this community to work. The third output is capacity building. We do want to build capacity and expertise to manage this infrastructure and to use it. And the last output is part advocacy, part of the dissemination of the project outcomes, and interaction with other donors and stakeholders in this area. So, and the ultimate output is raising, awareness of what we're doing and using it to drive some digital transformation in research and education. So that's just a slide that describes some of the infrastructure that we have, put out there to make sure that this is all possible. So one is eduid.africa. Eduid.africa is a trust and identity platform. So you're thinking authorization, authentication to the different repositories or applications that will be on this network that will sort of drive open science. And then Trust Broker Africa, which is a cooperation framework for security teams, because in cybersecurity is a very important element to consider when you're building such advanced infrastructure. So part of this project, which is the second part I'll be talking about, is this particular work track that actually looks at federated identity management for libraries and open science platforms. So LibSense, I mentioned LibSense at the beginning. Now that's the LibSense is a acronym for Library Support for Embedded End-to-End Services and Infrastructure. Essentially, what we are doing is building a community to drive open science in Africa. And this started out in 2017 with originally in just Wakren as a library end-to-end collaboration. Then it was adopted by the other regions and became an activity of Africa Connect 3. But the goal is to support the cultural change that's required. So the colleagues that are working and practitioners in the space, open science space, would know that research assessment is one of the areas that we're looking at creating some of this cultural change so that we can be more sustainable. Now, through the NRENs, this community is looking to provide technical support and build some technical capacity, but conjointly develop value-added services that are locally contextual. So a little bit about LibSense and how we are organized. So I just talked about the overall strategy in the previous slide, but one of the focuses is to strengthen local and national services. And then we're looking at doing this in a bottom-up distributed way. So you can see the little diagram on the right, we're working at institutional level right through to the continental level. And we do this through 3 pillars. One is policy. So we got a working group that works on policy, open science policies, governance, and leadership issues. Another one is infrastructure. That's where you find most of the RENs actually taking an active role. And there we're looking at creating platforms for open access journals, repositories for publications and data, and the discovery services that make this available to the communities. We're also doing a lot of capacity building. And some of this is in creating connections to disciplinary sort of teams. Some of it is in actual training. Some of it is fostering these communities, whether it is across disciplines or within disciplines. And so the idea is, create infrastructure, provide policy to guide the use of infrastructure and to make sure that all works nicely, and train people to actually use it. So we've been doing this with a slate of partners. There's, like I said, this started out originally in Wakren, and there was with the help of some very helpful partners, who were able to sort of shape LeapSense from the beginning such that it attracted everybody else. So now, like I said, it's the regional RENs are all partners in LeapSense, and they will have other national organizations such as library consortia, other regional organizations, and some external collaborators such as the National Institute of Informatics in Japan, which have a similar platform for shared services, and then all the other library associations. So the thematic areas in which we work, I've already talked about: infrastructure, policy development, and capacity building. So this is a little timeline I have spoken about some of this, but it gives you an idea of how we've evolved in the last 3 years, or in the first 3 years rather. So at the beginning, we started out with an open access workshop, got people together in 2016. And this was at the beginning, this was even before we actually even had the name LeapSense. We're following up from other projects that had identified that this needed to be done. We spent 2017 and 2018. At this time, our partners, IFO, COA, and others had sort of joined in. And this was really about, running a sort of agenda setting survey, Pan-African survey, and workshops that allowed us to understand the challenge and evolve a plan to tackle it. So by 2019, the Africa Connect project, which had been sponsoring this, now took the results of our work, and we've sort of developed that into a new proposal for Africa Connect 3, which is what we're actually executing at the moment. I beg your pardon. Yes, so that was the first 3 years. Now this is the current phase, is Africa Connect 3 now. Some of the things we had done, yes, the pandemic put a spoke in our plans, but regardless, we were able to leverage the fact that we had a strong community across Africa, which is ready to operate virtually, to run skill profiles webinars. These were like workshops that were intended to have with parties across Africa to determine the kinds of skills that librarians needed to be contemporary today, and the kind of job profiles that was needed to support open science. So we had a number of webinars online. We were able to develop profiles in English and in French for our different communities, 8 skills profiles in English and French. This is all on the website. The link is at the end of the slides. We ran a few workshops as well on open access publishing and research data management and identifiers. In the same year, 2020, the UNESCO has started the Global Open Science consultation. We developed a statement, which we've called Open Science Africa, that describes the principles and actions for global participation for Africa, which we fed into the consultation. And that has sort of created more momentum, because now we're hanging on to the tails of that recommendation, because it actually describes where we would like to go to, so infrastructures that are more community owned and non-profit, definitely community governed. We're also in that year, because of common challenges that exist in Africa and Latin America, established a formal relationship with La Referencia. Red Clara is the regional REN of Latin America. We already had some relationships there, so we're all working there. And then with Roof Forum is an agricultural network, a network of agricultural institutions in Africa, over 140 or 50 institutions. So one of the things we're working with them to establish a domain repository that will serve as a demonstrator for other similar disciplines. We're also running a few pilots to sort of demonstrate the power of shared platforms, especially where there are technical challenges, or, as we quite often experience in Africa, funding challenges. So we're running national demonstrators in Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire. And we also have the demonstrator I mentioned as regional for Roof Forum. One real important activity that we have engaged in the last 8-9 months is what we have termed our national open science roadmaps. So this is our community in the different countries convening stakeholders to basically talk about open science within the pillars that we have identified earlier on: policy, infrastructure, and capacity building, and working together to define an action plan that they can execute to move the country further down the line as far as open science is concerned. Now, those are national roadmaps. As the 3 regional RENs and within the Africa Connect 3 project, we are complementing that with the regional equivalents of these workshops. So these regional policy workshops are going to be in collaboration with the Regional Association of Universities. And the idea here is to sit with the people, the stakeholders that actually drive open science on campus. So we're talking the deputy vice chancellors of research, head librarians, deans of postgraduate schools that manage early career researchers. And the point of these workshops is going to be really, how do we take these high-level principles and actions and recommendations and use policy to drive them locally, so that that is on campus, the impact, where that's the ultimate impact is actually first on campus. Right, again on campus, which is really where this is going to really happen. We have some models which we are engaging the research and university communities. Now, we have, subject to funding, we'll be starting an early career researcher training program in January. And this is really practical guidance and support for researchers to learn how to open their research processes. And then there would be, all this training will be happening on the platforms that we have deployed. We would complement this with some what we're calling open science communities on campus. This essentially are going to be like the user groups that you found in the old Usenet and Linux communities, where champions or people who have some experience would create these opportunities to interact with other members of campus and bring in early career researchers and create a social environment to support the training program. As part of that, we have a leadership program, and the idea here again is reach the people that research assessment that are involved in research assessment, get them to start to look at policies that create the opportunity for their researchers to do this work without being subject to circumstances like being appraised by journals, by publishing in journals that are not easy to publish in many cases for them, where they have to pay and circumstances like that. But really to gather support from the leadership, you know, and so that open science is more mainstream. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. If you've got any questions, I can take them now.
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for the organization, for inviting me and to have this great opportunity to show you all the work we are doing in Latin America. In the network, La Referencia Network. I'm waiting for my slides.
We can see the opening slide, so you can just ask the team to advance to the next one.
Okay. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I think that it's very interesting to hear all the panelists, because we are in the same way of think. We think that we have all the same goals. And I can start without my. Okay.
We are seeing your Who Am I slide. Yeah. So we're ready.
Okay,
so just tell the team when you need to advance.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Juan Pablo. Well, who am I? I've been working with open access since 2003 at the Brazilian Institute of Information in Science and Technology. And why I've been working until here? Because I think that it's this movement and open science movement is a great opportunity to Latin American show the world our production, because we were a little bit invisible to the scientific world. And so I've been working through these years in doing that. Next, please. Well, I'm here to talk to you about La Referencia. La Referencia is the Latin American Open Science Repository Network. It's a very interesting representation of our region, because La Referencia is formed by an association of government authorities of science and technology and innovation, and it was founded in 2012. Our mainly mission is to give visibility to the public-funded scientific production in the federated network. I think that it's very important to say that if the governments are involved in the La Referencia, I think that we can do a lot of things, because we achieve the agreement of our government that it was an issue very important to work about. Next, please. These are the countries that are members of La Referencia nowadays in 2021. And as you can see, you have Spain in La Referencia too. And why? Well, because Spain has a traditional cooperation with Latin America, and so we thought that it was very interesting that Spain was integrated in La Referencia. Next, please. What is the general situation in Latin America? We can find a symmetry inside each country and amongst Latin American countries. It's very important to say, to highlight that Latin America does not have common funds for R&D. The funds mainly comes from the budget of each country. either directly or indirectly, and not always in the stable way. Next, please. How we are in the open science, in terms of open science policies. Well, Argentina has a law that requires open access dissemination through the repositories of the institution, both publications and data. Chile now has a policy on open access to scientific information and scientific data, and they are working in open science strategic line. Brazil has a manifesto for open science, and Brazil is a RDA node. Costa Rica is a second node from the region of RDA, and are working in the implementation of 2 data repositories, including the national one. Next, please. We have 76 Latin American repositories registered in the R3data.org. Please. At national level, Brazil is now collecting Dataverse instance. They are implementing research data repository, Lattes Data, that's named Lattes Data, from one of the main Brazilian national funding agencies. And at the Brazilian IBICT research data repository will be implemented now. We have launched a call for creation of 3 data repositories in 3 universities or research institutes. Argentina is harvesting across different repositories. Costa Rica is ready to expose their repositories, their data repositories. I must say that Spain are working too. They are implemented a policy to the research data too. Next, please. At the regional level, LaVerensia Central Node is working on collecting data sets from national nodes already. We are in a very straight collaboration with RDA Global and RDA Americas. Next, please. As with open access, we are working with university and national research institutes to create data repositories and disseminate open science in our region. Next, please. We are, as Dominic said, we have this tradition on open access, and now we are trying to spread the pillars of open science. But for us, which are the future of repositories? It means to work in evaluation and indicators, please. We have to change the ways in which researchers are evaluated to include open science indicator. The world must change it. As you know, Latin America follows the rules of the developed countries, and so it will add us a lot if the world could start to change the way, in a concrete way. But we are doing our work, as we can have the opportunity to see with FOLEC by Claxo. Please. We have to change the culture of research managers of institutions and researchers in favor of open science research evaluation. Next. We have to convince national funding agency to link funding with the adoption conditions of open science. We have started to do it, but we have to spread these ideas in all the agencies funding of our region. Next, please. Which are our challenges? We have to create national legal frameworks on open science in all countries. It turns our work much more easier. Only three countries has now approved national frameworks. We have to try to obtain national, regional, and international funding to support open science activities. As I said before, we don't have, as European Union, a regional fund to work on open science. We have to build a common infrastructure for large data storage and interoperability, since Latin America does not have common fund sources. We have to create strong national infrastructures with proper technical human resources. We have to identify and recover Latin America's research data, spread in national initiatives and in foreign infrastructures. Next, please. Next, please. Okay. And for us, it was very, very important, the recommendations by UNESCO, because it recognized the regional difference and the challenges of scientists, in particular in developing countries. I think that it will be a very important document to use inside our government to try to convince our authorities to adopt, to invest in open science. Next, please. Which are the lessons we've learned on open science from the pandemic period, please? Next. Simple. The commodification of scientific communication delays scientific developments, as all we know. The proof is that during the pandemic, the large commercial publisher opened their journals and data aware that the free circulation of knowledge is essential for a fast scientific development. Editorial oligopolies charge high subscriptions or APC prices, which means that not all researchers have access to the research results and research data of their peers or publish their advance to the world scientific community. Please, the next. The next. Researchers and their institutions, the previous, please. Researchers and their institutions need to be evaluated positively for the efforts to widely disseminate their research data and research results. Thus, global problems will be treated equally throughout the world, and those who engage in research whose results will impact everyone would receive due recognition. Next one, please. La Referência, I must say that La Referência is open access, La Referência is open science, and La Referência is open to collaboration. You are all welcome to work with us. And it's very important to say that we respect the difference as a foundation of international collaboration. Next, please. Thank you. But before I start the floor, I would like to put one idea that I had. I think that we are discussing the fantastic presentation of Jean-Claude, that we have to think in another way to publish not only our not only our papers, but our data too. I think that the government must assume that the publication, the communication of research is the end of the research. And so why not to assume the costs of that movement as they do in the systems like Cielo, like Redalic and others. Thank you a lot.
One of the questions, so there's been several questions coming in through the chat, and so I've been trying to sort of pick the threads in some of the ways that those questions could be connected. And one of the questions, because we seem to be mentioning all of the presentations have touched on incentives in some way. So one of the questions I wanted to ask, this question was asked in a slightly different way and directed at Professor Miedema, but I think it's a question that can be answered by all the panelists, is how should incentive systems at a place like the University of Utrecht consider the practices and the realities of researchers working in Latin America? How should the incentives that are created at a university focused on working on social issues consider the social issues and the realities of the researchers working in a place like Latin America?
Can I answer? Yeah.
Yes,
and that's a wonderful question, because that's exactly what it's about. So so we had a discussion when I started as a dean 10 years ago, in 2009, that we were just focusing on international topics. We were going for the international journals, but a lot of regional issues that were happening in our own country were not addressed because you couldn't get into the high-level journals. And so people were picking topics that were international. So sociologists were studying sociological issues with whom, and those papers could get them into the American Sociological Reviews, which has a high impact. But and we had exactly the same discussion as your question. Yes, we also have to focus on questions nearby, regional, national, and it could also be in their own language. And that's the same for you, exactly the same for you. I was doing a mutual learning exercise with 12 member states. We were in Croatia, we were in other countries, and they said, we also want to publish in our own language because we are publishing scientific studies about our country, in our own country, because it's also for these people to be able, that they want to read. And this is exactly, of course, what is now happening when you talk to people in Indonesia or in Africa. So they should have their own agenda. Their agenda should not be determined by editors of Nature and Science. Come on. So take your responsibility. And of course, it can be done. It can be in the Finnish. In Finland, they said we have to have our own Finnish, publications about, issues in Finland. And it's the same for everywhere. So this is, of course, so I'm a white man from Europe. So I'm guilty as hell, of course. But this is I was in South Africa at Cape Town University giving this talk, exactly what I did an hour ago. And I said, please don't go in this direction, but you have to decide for yourself. And of course, if you pick your topics from Africa, of course, that is the most important thing that you can do. But you're the boss, and we're not going to decide. And also not the editors of Nature and Science. It's your choice. It's your money. So yeah, step up.
I see Dominique and Bianca both nodding. Go ahead, Dominique.
Yes, please don't feel guilty, Professor Miedema, because you're changing the research assessment procedures, so you are helping us. I wanted to mention an example, the National Research Council in Argentina, when they review where researchers and research projects publish for social sciences and humanities, they look at Web of Science and Scopus, but they also look at Redalic and Cielo. So they are taking in consideration what is published within the region. And that should happen also for rural development, for caring for health and for environment. So that is a concrete example. As you mentioned in the chat, Professor Miedema, we need to make concrete actions, no?
Absolutely, and you have to keep in mind that there's a huge, for instance, if you study education, my brother was a professor in educational sciences. If you study education and how it's being, seen, is very cultural and context dependent. And for instance, a lot of research, somebody told me, and then I stopped, somebody told me when we were in a panel in Leuven from Indonesia, he said, because of the journal impact factors in that game, people are not doing research which is important for Indonesia, but they are doing research that can make their career. So what we say, are you making a career or are you making a cure? Well, I'm not giving the answer.
Yes, I agree with you all. And I think that we are trying to build our own system, our own way to work and to work with open science. And we have to consider another initiative including beyond the Cielo and the Red Lake. We must consider this kind of initiative because they have a very important tradition in our region. But we have, you can see that we in Brazil, we have more than 4,000 journals to communicate in open access, to communicate our results. And so I think that one of the most important things is to change the way we assess the researchers. We have to give positive points for whom is doing their work as open as possible.
I'll conclude with one final, and I'll ask everyone to just keep their answers very, very brief. So just and because this is another question that came through, is what is the most radical action that I think you have taken or that you think should be taken within your organizations to see the kinds of changes you were asking to see? So just very short, quick, what is the one radical action? And I'll let whoever has it ready first.
The basic idea is, as Geoffrey Bolton said, it is time for science to take control back of open access, open scholarly communications, open science. Thank you.
I think put your money where your mouth is. I think that for us, and if you are in academic leadership, to really say we're not going to use journal impact factors anymore, then that's sort of apparently induces a crisis. In my country now, there were 170 people writing a letter saying that Utrecht was stupid and that this would damage science. And these are all from the elites, the people who play that game that I have been playing before. And so, the brave thing is to just go and discuss with them, but go on and don't get averted. And I can tell you, it's not easy.
Thank you. Laura, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Juan Pablo. We think from POLEC that the key issue is to diversify the sources and methodologies for research assessment, and also the actors, the academic and extra-academic actors involved. Thank you.
Well, I think that the governments must assume their communication systems and to invest in the national communication systems.
Great. Thank you very much. Let me take, I know we're over time now. I'm going to move on to our next panel, which is also one very interested in, as Thanos said. Thank you very much to all of our panelists for their interesting presentations. I'll turn it back over to you, Thanos.
Thank you very much, Juan. This was really a very exciting panel, despite the challenges that we had. I want to thank Professor Frank Miedema, Dr. Dominique Babini, and Dr. Laura Rovelli, Dr. Bianca Amaro, and I also want to thank Mr. Omo Oaya for his efforts. There were so many interesting aspects, but because there's no time, I'm just going to rush a little bit. May I just repeat Professor Miedema's urging actors in the scholarly communication cycle to put their money where their mouth is, and then just give immediately the floor to the next panelist,